Welcome to this video, which is about studying anatomy. Uh, I am speaking from the point of view as a program director to a physical therapy program here at Concord Miramar in Florida. However, really, this can help you study anatomy for anything, whether it's personal training, whether it's DPT school, whether it's high school, whatever it is. I'm hoping that this can help anybody with this aspect. Of course, these are personal tips that I and sharing that I think help, but of course, I would love to hear any other ideas, input that anybody has to make this task easier, and I do hope that it will be helpful. All right. So what it says here on the slide is PT instructors told you to know bones, muscles, organs, and nerves, insertions, all kinds of things, right? There are 206 bones in our bodies. While in many physical therapy and other educational programs, you don't always have to know every single one. Or there may be some that you have to know more than others. That's a lot of bones that you have to know, okay? And then if you notice that right underneath it says plus landmarks, the thing about what we do in physical therapy is that you have to know the bones because, of course, if your patient breaks their humerus or breaks their femur or something, or, what we call fractures it, you have to know that. But really, we palpate and place our tools like goniometers and stuff in the little pieces of the bone. We don't necessarily just focus on the entire bone itself, right? So, for example, in tests and measures in physical therapy school, you have to place your measuring tool to measure range of motion on 3 landmarks, because the movable arm, the fulcrum, and the stationary arm all point to a landmark, and those landmarks tend to be little pieces of the bone, okay, what we call landmarks, right? So it may be the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, the acromion process of the scapula, and pointing towards the ulnar styloid process of the ulna. Now, if you don't know what ulna, humerus, and scapula are, that's already going to be tough because you won't know where to place this tool. And then B, if you don't know the little piece of that ulna, that humerus, and that scapula, then you're really going to be stuck as to how to accurately and appropriately measure, whether that is in lab, whether that is on your test in physical therapy school, or whether that is eventually on your boards, okay? So if we're going back to the concept of that there's 206 bones, let's say we really focus on 100 of them, right? It's not only knowing the bones, it's knowing 100 bones plus 100 little pieces of the bone. That's already 200 things, right? Then the next little section here says approximately 600 muscles. Now, once again, in physical therapy school, depending in massage therapy school, whatever, maybe there are some muscles that we don't focus on as much as others, okay? In physical therapy school, you tend to focus on what we call gross musculature, which is basically your bigger muscles that really do the work of moving your major joints, like your shoulders, your elbows, your wrists, your ankles, your hips, and your knees, right? There may be other programs, like if you're in speech pathology school, or like if you're in occupational therapy school, where they'll focus on specific muscles, like speech language pathologists may focus on all the muscles of the mouth, of the tongue. Physical therapy, we don't really look at those that much, right? Occupational therapy, students may look at like every little intrinsic or small muscle of the hand. We do discuss those, but we don't go as deep into them as we would a muscle of the knee or of the hip, because we deal with knees and hips a lot more. So there's always going to be specific tailoring to whatever program you're studying in. But again, 600 is a lot. So even if in physical therapy school, I ask you to know 150 of those, 200 of those. If you say 250 muscles plus the 100 and so bones, that's 350 things, okay? And then I said that you have to know the landmarks of the bones. That's 450 things. I'm just guesstimating, which really is more, but whatever. And then on top of knowing the 150 muscles, you have to know the origin, insertion, and actions of those muscles. So that's another 150 things. So far we're up to what? 400, 500, 600 things you got to know, okay? Now I am kind of over exaggerating it because it's not even that much, okay? It's not 500 and 600, but it could be around 100 or 200 things that you will have to know anatomically for physical therapy school, okay? I can do lessons on every body part, muscles, origins, insertions, bony landmarks, and it'll be hours and hours and hours worth of information of what you have to know. And again, it's not every muscle and it's not every bone. So you can imagine how much that is, okay? The problem is that a lot of schools don't spend time teaching you just these muscles and bone. They teach you, they cover the muscles and bones, like make sure you know your lats and the origin and insertion, it's this. But we don't spend time just focusing on that. We spend time on how you can use that information in your practice. The memorizing the lats and the origin and insertion of the lats is really up to you, okay? So if I could spend a few hours just reciting and pointing out the things that you gotta know, imagine how much more time and how much more hours is needed for you to sit with that information and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until you know it, okay? So point being that you cannot learn all your muscles, origins, and insertions and bones in one day. You cannot learn it if your teacher covers it or shows it to you one time, okay? And it does take an extra amount of time, dedication, and hours to go through it. And the more time you have with it, the better for you, because it can be a lot of things. That's me just speaking on muscles, bones, bony landmarks, origins, insertions of action and actions. But how about nerves, which I haven't even talked about? There's 31 pairs of peripheral nerves and 12 cranial nerves, okay? So if I do ask you to know all of those, which doesn't seem like a lot, if you add them together, it's what? 3, 4, 43 things, but 43 things on top of the 100 bones, on top of the landmarks of those bones, on top of the 100 muscles, on top of the origins, insertions, and actions of those muscles. So if you add everything together anatomically, if you understand that in physical therapy school, you will have to know about bones, landmarks, muscles, origins, insertions, actions, nerves, innervation, and what muscle they're connected to, and now you're linking the muscles and the nerves. It can seem like a lot, and it really is a lot. Of course, many people have done it, right? I'm sure you're watching this video because you're in a physical therapy school, or you're leading towards a physical therapy career, or maybe not physical therapy, but something else where you have to think about anatomy and know anatomy, or you just want to learn anatomy, okay? You're not the first PTA student. You're not the first OTA student. So it means that there has been plenty of people before you who have learned this stuff, and it can be learned. And that's why I'm giving you these tips, but at the same time, I want to let you know that it is something that can be done, but it will require time and dedication and interest to these things, and to understand the mass amount of how much it could be, right? All right, moving along. So what are my tips? Okay. And again, this is coming from me and my experience, not only as a PTA, because I am a PTA. I've been a PTA for over 12 years now. I'm also an instructor, so I teach people these things. I review them with students. I know what it is to be a student, or to have a student in front of me and what they're going through, not only because I've done it myself, because I see it every day. And I'm also a program director who has a master's in education, and kind of know the also special aspects of what it is to teach and learn, right? So my tips are, number one, organize the body into sections, okay? You need to organize the information in a way that is easier and that you can focus on one thing at a time, okay? If you really try to put yourself in in other people's shoes, or in a different set of eyes, a different set of shoes, okay? And you think about when you've ever learned something, it's a lot harder to be like, oh yes, I'm gonna teach you how to do this job. Let me teach you everything all at once, right? Or do you start a new job or start a new class, and then they're like, this week we're doing this, next week we're doing that, next week we're doing that, and then we're starting to put it together. That's the same way that you should go about anatomy. So if you just start reading and reading and reading everything all at once, it's going to look like a lot. You need to create a plan of organization, okay? But we'll go through each tip as I go through the PowerPoint, right? Number two, start with basics and build, okay? That's the way I teach it in my program. I think it helps. Again, this is just my personal tips. It may or may not work for you, but I cannot tell you to learn the origin of a muscle and the insertion of a muscle and say the origin of the hamstrings is the ischial tuberosity. And then I expect you to understand what the ischial tuberosity is when you have never learned about the ischial tuberosity in your life. So I would rather teach you what the ischial tuberosity is first, and then talk about the muscle and tell you that that is the origin of that muscle. You see? So I feel like there has to be kind of an order so things make sense. Okay? 3, understand the foundation of muscle movement, which we will go through when I get there. Okay? What I mean by that. 4, group similar structures together, and that really just goes back to number 1, an organization. Okay? But I'll give you some examples in a little bit. 5, understand your learning style or preferences. You're going to hear educators say this a lot. It sounds common sense. It sounds redundant, but it really is important, okay? There is tons of studies, research, science, all this stuff that proves that all these things are true. And so teachers say it all the time, right? Learn your learning style. How do you learn? And then students are like, this is the advice that they have to give me. But the reason why we say it is because literally it works, okay? Because of all the research, because of the students that we've seen go through it. That's why we give you that advice. And then review the information frequently. Again, that just goes back to how we learn and all the science behind that. Anytime you have ever learned something, whether it's a dance, whether it's a song, whether it's a sports move, I'm pretty sure you didn't do it one time and then bam, you learned it, okay? You had to repeat it, and that's just the truth for any kind of learning you're doing. Sorry to tell you, but it's the truth for learning anything and studying anything, including anatomy. Okay, So let's talk about these tips, right? First tip, organize the body into sections, all right? Whether you organize it by joints, like you see in the corner here, where it says shoulder, elbow, hip, finger, that is how a lot of physical therapy classes are structured when students are learning anatomy and physiology or kinesiology. We usually be like, okay, today let's just focus on the shoulder and everything about the shoulder by itself. Tomorrow or the next class, let's focus on the elbow and everything in the elbow by itself, right? You have to do that organization and that compartmentalization, okay? Because again, first of all, one thing could lead to another. So if you understand like doing maybe the whole upper extremity, which is like the arm, hands, elbow area all together, you'll see the linkages between the two. And secondly, it won't feel like everything's mixing and mushing all up together, okay? There are certain things anatomically that either sound the same or literally have the same name, they're just in a different place. And so if you learn it all at once, all mushed together, you could get confused very easily, okay? The middle picture there is showing you directions of the body. That's also a good part of your organization to understand what we call directional terms. Because if I say this is the lateral epicondyle and this is the medial epicondyle, and you don't understand what lateral and medial means, you won't know if it's on this side or on that side, on the inside or the outside. So part of that organization is knowing where it is in the body. And what type of directional terms we use, which are these fancy terms. It's not just left or right. It's not inside or outside. It's usually like lateral, medial, superior, inferior, distal. And so if you have a good medical terminology basis of directional terms, this will really, really help you learn your anatomy, okay? And so again, the more you can break things up by extremity, by joint, by body part, the easier it will be, and go and focus on one thing at a time while you're learning it, okay? And try to really kind of master as much as you can that section before moving on to the next section. This is why this requires time. All right, number 2. Start with the basics and build. This is what I was saying about how I like to teach certain parts first and then move on to the next part. And literally the order that I have it here is how I teach it. So I always start with bones first. Then I go into muscles, and lastly I go into nerves, okay? Why is that? Because your bones are underneath everything, okay? So your muscles attach to your bones. So when I tell you about a muscle and when I tell you what it's attached to, I'm gonna mention a bone. But again, if I'm talking about the muscle first and you don't know where the bone is, how is that gonna make sense? So you have to start with knowing where the bone is first to know where the muscle is, okay? So it just makes sense in the way we're built inside that you start with what's deeper or what it's attached to, and then whatever's on top of that, and then whatever's on top of that, okay? When you teach bones, it's major bone names and landmarks. That's it. There's really nothing else to it, at least anatomy-wise, musculoskeletal anatomy being specific. And then when we teach you muscles in physical therapy school, it's going to be the muscle, what it looks like, what it's attached to, which is going to be bones, and then what it does, which is going to make sense if you know the bones and what joints those bones make up, okay? And then lastly, we cover nerves only because nerves are a little bit broader. So if I say this muscle is right here, it does stuff to the shoulder, that makes sense because it's on top of the shoulder. but your nerves are a little bit different because you could have nerves in your neck and in your shoulder that help make connections to this area, but then it could make connections even further out. And so it's a little bit broader and more spread out than what you would think. It might be easier if you could say the nerve right here does stuff right here, but that's not the case with nerves. The nerve right here could do stuff here and here and here and here and here. So I leave that for last because you have to, again, know kind of everything that's there first for you to understand why the nerve travels the way it does. So I think, for me, I like to say to go in this order once you study, rather than just trying to study all at once and be like, here's a muscle, these are all the bones, these are all the nerves. Start with just bones by themselves first, then muscles, origins, insertions, and actions, and then nerves last, so you can group them all together. Okay. Understand the foundation of muscle movement. Okay. Now, this in itself, this slide, can be its own lesson that could take hours. Okay. But I'm obviously just giving you tips, so I'm going to go through it quickly, and then we can make in the future its own video of what this really means and how to go deep into this. But when we're learning the muscles, one of the biggest important things for physical therapy school is knowing what the muscle does. That's how we work, right? So when we exercise a muscle, you have to do what it does. When we stretch a muscle, you have to go the opposite to what it does. When you check on your patient and you're trying to see what they're having a hard time and you're seeing what they can't do, then that's going to link it to what muscle is messed up, right? So the main thing is, what does that muscle do? Besides the origins and insertions, the origins and insertions are really there to help you know what it does, okay? So if you understand the foundation of how muscles work and create movements, okay, it will help you figure everything else out, okay? Like, if I show you a picture of a muscle up here, again, just because this is what you could visually see in the camera, my shoulder, you should already be thinking in your head, this muscle probably does shoulder, arm stuff, okay? There's no way that I can give you a muscle here and be like, oh yeah, that lifts your foot up. How does a muscle here lift your foot up if it's right here? Okay, so sometimes you gotta think common sense, right? Like, look at the picture, look at where it's at, look at the landmarks it's connected to, and be like, well, it kind of has to work around there because that's where it is, right? And that's really the foundation of muscle movement. A muscle cannot act in an area that it's not, okay? Secondly, if you understand more difficult concepts as you go through physical therapy school, like agonist, antagonist, synergist, things like that, it will help you understand that, for example, an agonist can never do the same thing as an antagonist. So when you're thinking of what muscles do and you already identified your agonist, you know that it could never do the opposite of that, right? And we do have a balance in our bodies where usually this side does one thing and then this side does the opposite thing, and they work together as opposites. And once you gain that concept, it'll really help you. But again, this could be its own lesson, okay? 4, group similar structures together. That really goes back to that muscle thing I was saying, right? So if everything is around the elbow, keep it right there. Focus on what's right there. Picture what's right there. And study what's right there. Study all the things of the elbow. Study all the things of the leg. Understand that they all work together, that they're all around the same area, that they all may attach to the same area, because that will help you make connections, okay? And if you really know, let's say one of these muscles in the back of the leg, you know that one for sure, and there's another one right under it, knowing that first one will help you remember the second one. And the second one you may not be great at, but at least you can associate it with the one you do know, okay? And that helps when you, again, kind of stick to a certain body part or body area and really focus on that before moving on, okay? 5, again, your learning style. I think the hardest thing that I always get students to hopefully see is that we don't all learn the same. And it's not that you're not studying, it's that you're not studying the best way for you. And I get students tell me, but I read the book all night, like for hours. I've read it for the past 5 days. You know, I'm really studying every night. And then they're studying in a way, and I believe them. They're sitting there reading. And I believe them that every night they're sitting there reading. But for them, reading, maybe, is not the best way. I say that as a personal example because to me, if I'm trying to learn something fully, just reading a book, I like to read. But when it comes to learning a more difficult concept, just reading doesn't work for me. I have to see it in a visual way, and I have to maybe draw it, or I have to feel it. And so if I just sit there and read it, eventually I'm going to be reading, but it's just like, whoop, like it's going in and out. Like I'm looking at it and it's just not making too much sense. It's like reading something in another language, right? Like, are you reading it? Yes, your eyes are looking at words, and then you're maybe putting the letters together and making a word, but it's not making sense. So that is what it's like to study without your learning style. Now, this means you need to do a little bit more work to A, figure out your learning style, and B, make the information in a way that works for you, which means you have a book that they give you, but that book might not be enough. You have to put in extra work to create something or look at something or find something that puts it in a way that's best for you. And yes, that does mean extra work, and I know that sucks because you wish you could just pick up the book and read it, but that does not work for everybody, okay? So it's very important to do that work. And then I think I have one more tip. Let's see. And lastly, it's just really the common sense thing, which is repeat, 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 okay? Again, science says, psychology says, motor learning, which is what we learn in physical therapy, anything related to learning and your brain says the only way we remember things are to repeat it. What I put here in the slide is that the way we learn, or the way we put things in what we call long-term memory, which is what you need for physical therapy school and anything where you have to keep using that information over and over, is you have a sensory input, which is the information coming in. Then you remember for that moment because you just heard it, so you kind of recall something's coming in and it's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you have to attend to it, right? You have to care about it, you have to focus on it. And then the more and more you hear it, and the more and more you sleep on it, and the more and more you look at it, the more it stays in there as a part of your brain that you can retrieve, where your brain says, okay, this is important to know, okay? The amazing thing is that your brain is very good at saying, if I don't need it, I'm not going to use it. Whether it's learning information, whether it's movement, whether it's muscles, our brain is an amazing thing where it's like, if I don't need it, I'm not going to spend my time on it, okay? It's very much that person, like, you know, that person in your life that is like, oh, that's for me? No, it's not. All right, bye. I don't care about it. That's your brain. Okay? So the only way to really, really learn something is to make your brain care about it. And the only way to make your brain care about it is to look at it, repeat it, look at it, repeat it, use it, look at it, repeat it, use it. And again, I'm sure you can think of real examples in your life, whether you learn the song, whether you learn the dance, whether you learn the poem, whether you learn movie lines, where you learned it because you saw it so many times, because you repeated it so many times, because you saw it online as a meme so many times, whatever it is, and you kept using it and saying it and looking at it and saying it. And that's just the truth of studying. You're not going to learn this in one day. That is not discouraging. That is just a fact. Okay. So yes, you need to set a schedule maybe of every night, look at it again. Every night, look at it again. And if you follow my tips of breaking things down, you don't want to spend forever on just the shoulder, on just the elbow, right? You eventually have to move on, but do go back to that shoulder, right? So let's say I make a plan and I say, week 1, I'm going to study the shoulder. Week 2, I'm going to study the elbow. Week 3, I'm going to study the wrist. Week 4, I'm going to study the neck, right? So you spend your whole week on the shoulder. Every night in that week, look at the shoulder, look at the shoulder, look at the shoulder. What did I learn yesterday? What did I learn the day before? What did I learn the day before that, right? Shoulder, shoulder, shoulder. Week 2, I'm moving on to the elbow. I'm going to do the same with the elbow, but I'm also going to throw some shoulder back in there a little bit. Okay? Not as much as when I was focusing on the shoulder, but just to kind of repeat it. And then after you go through the whole body, you're down to the little toe or whatever it is, right? And you went through every part. Now you repeat everything again and again as a whole. Shoulder, elbow, blah, 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 right? To create that repetitious thing. And this is why my biggest tip is it's going to take time and effort. And you are not going to learn it in one day. So be patient and start as soon as you can. If you know you're going into a PTA program, you should already be starting to look at anatomy. There's so many sources out there. You don't have to wait till your teacher tells you. Just start looking at it. Start studying it. All right? Hope this helps. If you want any more advice, please let me know. Thank you.